Everyone, this is a reaction video because I have to react to this because it's just egotistically funny. This is a Monster Z video. It's the most recent at this point, or at least from where I'm watching it. And I'm just gonna say it is pure utter arrogance in my opinion, because it presumes the Canadians will not fight if the Americans can basically attempt to annex Canada, because they're their own individual country. And yes, they might not agree with their liberal government at the moment, but the Conservatives are not going to stab them in the back by basically signing away Canada. And he even admits in this video is that if Canada becomes a state, I can tell you Republicans are going to feel that for decades. Like, literal decades, honestly. And the fact that we would have to deal with the Quebec situation. And I'll just say this. There's a reason why a lot of Canadians, or at least Canadians in World War I, and to my knowledge too, are known for their war crimes. Because, well, they don't fight fair. They fight dirty. Especially if their country is going to be invaded. Jesus Christ. Anyway, let's watch this video before I get too funny with it.
Much like Greenland and Panama, China does have its hooks in this country as well,
Oh,
specifically
shoot.
in resource extraction. Much like Greenland and Panama, China does have its hooks in this country as well, specifically in resource extraction, real estate ownership, tech sectors. The Chinese are building up their presence in America's northern neighbor, and this should absolutely be cause for concern. Now, I've spoken in the past about how if Canada had a larger population and better leadership, it could easily be a global superpower. It has incredible geographic position, access to both the Atlantic and Pacific as well as the Arctic. Territorially, it is massive, one of the largest countries.
This is true. This is true, but the fact is that not every country needs to be an imperialist, especially Canada. Especially the fact that Canadian relations don't necessarily need to be our relationships. Even if the Canadian people very much don't like their liberal government, like I said, I will say this, is that Monster Z is going to be arrogant, in my opinion, to believe that the Canadians are going to just sit down and not do anything about American expansionism into the Canadian landscape. Because I will say this. There's a reason why many of the Geneva Conventions were things the Canadians did in World War I. Especially the fact that they were famous during that war for winning battles they were outnumbered for. And just look at Ukraine and see how many years that war has happened. Do you really think the American people will be happy with Trump if he makes a war with our top neighbor? Believe you me, that will be arrogance in tenfold. But anyway, let's continue with this video.
On the planet and the largest if we include water area. It's also one of the most energy rich, yes, even more so than the United States. It's more energy rich than Russia and falls just behind Saudi Arabia. Just like Greenland, Canada is believed to be rich in rare earth elements, oil, gold, nuclear material, you name it. But just like Greenland, Canada lacks the ability to make the best use of these resources. While not as underpopulated as Greenland, Canada is pretty low on that list. They have a population density of about 11 people per square mile, which is even less than Mauritania. Most of that
Yeah, because the fact they don't want to completely destroy the natural landscape, and the fact that countries don't need to use their resources to the toppest degree to be a successful country. Like I said, their country might not like Trudeau, but I can tell you, Canadians are not going to like if the Americans invade. Even when pointing out the fact that their most conservative people would be considerably similar to Minnesota or even maybe New England conservative, not Southern conservative. And yes, I will call the Republican Party Republican conservative because that's the party of the South at this point.
Population is huddled pretty close to the US border and along the coasts. And especially in recent years, the Canadians just haven't seemed to have the economic motivation to make the most out of what nature has given them. Trump made a very interesting point in that the United States really doesn't need anything from Canada. The Canadians...
That's not really true because a lot of, for example, maple syrup, and yes, I know that's a joke, but a lot of maple syrup in the United States and the world come from Quebec and other major products like, for example, lumber, and many rare metals and materials go to the United States to the fact of, the automotive industry relies on NAFTA or whatever version exists today. And the fact that I wouldn't be surprised if Donald Trump keeps with his ridiculous rubbish that cars go up in price tenfold. Yes, in my opinion, smaller cars are going to be cheaper, but still the same difference. And where is the other one? Anyway, I'm making something at the moment.
Canadians are more so dependent on American resources than vice versa. Canada is, in a way, to the United States what Greenland is to Denmark. If the United States were to suddenly vanish, Canada would be at a loss for what to do with its exports and imports. China would probably fill a good chunk of that, but it still wouldn't be enough. On top of that, Trump made an excellent point in that we basically protect Canada, because Canadian security, whether we like it or not...
Yeah, but the fact is that I'm going to say, yes, Canadians don't really put so much money in their defense spending, but the fact that, not every country needs to have the military size to win a world war. No country needs enough materials and war materials to win a world war. It's, in my opinion, ridiculous to believe that every country needs enough materials to at least win 3 world wars when the fact that, most war in modern day, especially on the the North American continent, is practically impossible, or mostly impossible. Yes, airplanes can get here, but most of the enemies are too far away or on the border. Because, I will say this, the Canadians are not going to go quietly if Donald Trump tries to force the Canadians to give up their land. Because I will say that we have a nationalist government in the United States. But do you really think that a Canadian government would just sit down quietly and allow Americans to just take over Canada? That's ridiculous. That's the same logic Russia had. And look at that war. It's happened for nearly 4 years now. And it doesn't have any sign of stopping. So, I'll just say, wow, okay, this video is getting kind of long, but you get my point. That it is egotistical to believe that Canada will just sit down quietly and just, metaphorically speaking, basically have his house robbed at gunpoint.
Is American security. if there is some type of infiltration, if there is any type of danger to Canada's security, we have a demilitarized border with them. If a terrorist makes their way into Canada, they can make their way into the United States. If an invading army makes its way into Canada, they can make their way into the United States. American defense along both coasts de facto provides Canada with a degree of security that means they don't have to invest that into their own national defense. In practice, Canada is a very spoiled protectorate. Sure, every now and then we wave our influence around and compel them to swing their foreign policy one way or the other, but Canada still has a massive degree of independence. Will Canada become a U.S.?
Because they're an independent country. We're not an empire. We shouldn't and should not try to force other countries to do our bidding. They're other countries. They have their own responsibilities. Unless you believe in imperialism, and I understand most of the Republican Party does, but the fact that it's egotistical to believe that the Republican Party, or not, my apologies, and yes, I know audio spikes are going to be all over the place because I'm making something at the moment, but, well, I'll just say, it is pretty egotistical to believe that Canada will just sit down quietly. I know I've said that like 12 times, but still.
Territory or a state, however. Probably not, and it might be undesirable to do such a thing. If we were to take on all this territory, once again, one of the largest countries, if not the largest country on the planet. And again, while relatively underpopulated, we're still talking about a population of 40 million people.
And a whole lot of people that are willing to fight, because a small population doesn't mean they're not willing to fight. And yes, I know the United States has a lot bigger military than Russia, but the fact is that the United States, even with Donald Trump's dictatorial actions, is not willing to destroy his political will, what little he even has, to start a war with our ally of Canada. More people would be revolting in the streets if he did so, sending our children to fight in war.
They all have their own way of doing things, they have their own government systems.
Yep.
Canada is a lot more complicated than Greenland is. It would not be an easy feat to integrate that territory into the United States in any fashion. From a political standpoint, Donald Trump shouldn't want to do this either. Greenland is an interesting situation. A lot of Greenlanders do tend to support socialist politics, but again, it's 60,000 people. It's not a massive amount of people. Canada has 40 million people. And I want to extend this to, it's not just unfavorable to annex all of Canada, it's...
Yeah, basically, if you annex any bit of Canada, that gives a blue state. For example, if you annex the entire country of Canada and put it in the United States, just as a big middle finger to the Republicans, Canadians would vote Democrat for every single election after. For example, if, hypothetically speaking, in 2025, if Canada was annexed, yes, tomorrow. I know it's impossible, but if tomorrow the entire population of Canada is a United States state, I will say this. Trudeau and how the state is populated, Republicans would lose their majority in the Senate and the House. Or, okay, the Senate, maybe, but the House, definitely. And the fact that even if you make them even smaller states, that still gives Democrats the advantage, because it just makes the electoral thing even worse for Republicans, because if, hypothetically, 13 new states, I will say this. Republicans would never win the Senate in my lifetime. Period. Unless something big happened. But Anyway, let's get back to the video. My apologies for making this ridiculously long.
Unfavorable to annex basically any part of Canada. Because there are some people on the right who might say, oh, well, let's just annex the conservative parts of Canada. There really aren't conservative parts of Canada. Alberta, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, they're not conservative by American standards. What are essentially considered the most conservative provinces of Canada are essentially Minnesota as far as politics are concerned. I'm going off of memory here, but if memory serves, not a single one of the prairie provinces is even over 50% religious. I'll have to double check that, I'll put it up on screen, but...
Let's go through this. Newfoundland and Labrador, 82% Christian. Prince Edward Island, 67. Nova Scotia, 58. New Brunswick, 67. Quebec, 64. Ontario, 52. Manitoba, 54. Saskatchewan, 56. Alberta, 48. British Columbia, 34, where they actually have one of the biggest Chinese and Sikh populations in their country. Anyway, let's continue. Yukon, 35. I have Northwest Territories, 55. 5.2. Nunavut, 73.5. And that's not the type of Christianity that the Republicans in the South use. It is similar to Minnesotan Christianity, where it's very noticeably progressive. And the fact that we would have a multi-party system if the Republicans decided to annex Canada. Because the Conservatives would not want to be Republicans at all. Because their voters would outright vote them out of office. Even though it would be different, but still, my same point stands.
Even if it's around the 50 or 60% range, adherence is extremely low. On top of that, the predominant Christianity in those states is the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, or rather their Canadian branch, the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Canada. These churches, by and large, are not necessarily known for being particularly conservative. Generally speaking, they're some of the most socially progressive in North America. This is just a little side tangent, but from a political standpoint, Republicans should not want Canada to be a state or multiple states or whatever it might be, because you're going to be adding a lot more blue states to the union. But from a purely practical standpoint, again, you're taking on a lot of responsibility, having to manage all of these people, all this land. It's just not a good idea. Recognize the circumstances that have led the population of this country to want a more inward-facing government that doesn't want us looking abroad to Ukraine or Taiwan or to all these foreign countries. We have problems here that we need to deal with. We have situations that we need to solve before we even think about...
I agree and disagree with this, but overall, he has a point. With the Republicans that voted for Trump, or people that just voted for Trump, I can tell you, with not much argument, anti-war Republicans would go after Trump for basically stabbing them in the back. Because a war with Canada, because annexation is war, because there's no way in hell Canada sits down quietly. Like that famous video I put up on my community page, Age where basically it is the annexation of Canada. Resistance is guaranteed. Period. It is guaranteed unless we live in a Elseworld scenario or magic scenario. There's no world where Canada sits down quietly or completely. And the fact that, yes, certain people would be happy, but a war with Canada would make many people hate Trump and the Republican Party and have them lose in 26, 28, 32, 30, whenever and whenever. Wherever. If they start a war, they're going to lose. Who's politically speaking, because it will be a war that is so unpopular, it's not going to get anything done unless a miracle happens for the Republicans.
Taking on more responsibility. Before we even think about taking on a population larger than the size of California. That being said, the United States relationship in relation to Canada should be changed.
This is the egotistical part of the video. Yes, I know this video is quite literally almost twice as long, but it needs explaining. Because what he's going to say is egotistically ignorant and honestly naive. Because do you really think the United States is going to try to take a piece of Canada and not see any resistance at all? That is just pure and utter arrogance to believe that will not happen. Period.
And what I think we're going to see is Canada become more of an overt protectorate of the United States rather than becoming a proper territory of the United States. And this sort of harkens back to what I was mentioning earlier about the Arctic Ocean becoming a far more strategically important playing field for the United States. Of course, we can expand on what I was talking about insofar as why Greenland would be a benefit and how that also applies to Canada, who does have this massive Arctic shield. But Canada also has something that's very unique. They have their own Panama Canal, believe it or not. Back in 2009, just about, the Northwest Passage, yes, the famous Northwest Passage, if you're familiar with that, became relatively easy to navigate once again. And when news of this broke out, the global community was saying, hey Canada, you should make this an international sea route so everybody can just use it at their leisure. Even Canada recognizing how valuable this sea route was, said, no way, this is ours, we wanna assert our claim to it. You know, let's say we retake the Panama Canal, but then China or Russia or whoever decides to just use the Northwest Passage instead. Let's say even our European allies who want to skirt around using the Panama Canal decide to use the Northwest Passage. Well, we can't let that happen. See, if we control all trade going in through the south and north of North America, what a powerhouse of trade that would make the United States. While maybe
a dream and a dream and a dream and a dream, buddy. Because the Canadians know how valuable that is. Do you really think, really think the Canadians are not going to just sit down quietly and allow that to happen? Please. Cry me a river. For twice, because it's not going to happen. That's not going to happen, period. It's not. And anyone that believes that any war with Canada would be a good idea, yeah, just look at Vietnam and Afghanistan. Or just look at the Ukraine war. How unpopular in a democratic country would that war be if we invaded our democratic neighbor? Where the Canadians have every right to defend themselves from the United States aggression. Because that's pure and utter arrogance to believe they wouldn't fight back.
not the entirety of Canada. Occupying a lot of those islands surrounding the Northwest Passage might be viable. They're large.
I'm going to just stop this here. Or, not going to stop this here, but I'm just going to say this. This and that and just this in general, that is just egotistical to believe Canada would just throw that on, give that to the United States without a fight. Period. No questions asked. That is just asking for a war. Because that is just egotistical to believe a first world nation would not fight for its own territory is nonsense. It is utter bloody nonsense. citizens.
Underpopulated, and they could basically be used as a territory much like the Panama Canal Zone. Some other concessions from Canada as well would probably be expected. The Canadians will probably become a lot more economically dependent on the United States as Trump expects them to buy more American products. Perhaps we'll see the Canadians pitch in more insofar as military defense is concerned. Heck, it's not entirely out of the realm of possibility that you see a free movement zone pop up, similar to what you have in the European Union, where because we have this demilitarized border, you have Canadians and Americans who can sort of come and go as they wish, but they still have political boundaries. There is, you can't have a Canadian voting in an American election and vice versa, an American voting in a Canadian election. Those types of things. The Canadians still maintain their style of government, their social services. They still...
Yeah, if a free trade border like that happened, how many people would want to move to Canada? And have their kids there and become citizens because it's relatively easier to become a citizen of Canada than a citizen of the United States. And I just highly doubt the Supreme Court is going to overrule a literal American amendment with over 127 years of case law, but it's happened, so I'm going to just say Canadians have birthright citizenship. Period. So, how many Americans would move to Canada and over time become Canadian citizens? A whole lot. I will say this, a whole lot. Like, a lot more than you'll probably think. So, this is just utter ridiculous.
Canadians still pay Canadian taxes, etc. Canada, I don't think it's desirable for the Canadians to become a territory. Will the relationship and status in relation to the United States change? Yes, that could probably be expected. But annexing Canada is not going to be as easy of a feat as annexing Greece.
In my opinion, it's just utterly ridiculous Republicans are even talking about this. Because 40 million Canadians, yes, their military is small, but the fact that one American soldier dying in that war would make... Actually, every American soldier that dies, the Democrats can say, the Republican Party is sending our children to die in the war no one wanted. Because that is just political ammunition that you can just create in 10 seconds. So, this is just a dream and a dream and a dream. Because Canada will probably look inwards because of American idiocracy. But that's my opinion. But I'll just say this, is that it's egotistical to believe Canadians would not defend their own country borders. And why? I put do not disturb. Damn it. I put do not disturb. Oh god, I hope no one gets doxxed. But anyway, to get to the point, this is a dream, not reality.
England or annexing the Panama Canal Zone. I think on top of that, you might see exploitation rights to some degree. The United States investing in Canada in a similar way that China invests in foreign countries, where the United States might help build more infrastructure in Canada, but infrastructure that's owned and operated by the United States government or by some American entity. You could see the U.S. set up more mining operations in Canadian territory, extracting valuable resources. The U.S. is going to get more out of Canada, is what it seems like Trump is aiming for. There was a Canadian Prime Minister who even at one point said Canada has two options with what to do with its very valuable Arctic territory. It can either use it or lose it, and well, their failure to make the most of it, I think, is going to see the United States fill in that role. But well, their failure to make the most of it, I think, is going to see the United States fill in that role. But those are just my thoughts. Let me know.
I know this video is 30 minutes long. It's literally 3 times the length of the original video. But honestly, I think that will cover most of the reaction, because the fact is that this is just hogwash. This is just a dream and a dream and a dream and a dream. And the fact that Republicans think they can have Canada without a fight is egotistical to believe. Anyway, I will put his YouTube channel in the comments or the description, because even though I disagree with him vehemently, I will still respect him enough to properly cite him in this video, where his YouTube channel is this Monster Z. I'm not subscribed because I don't respect his politics, and he wouldn't respect mine either, so that's fair. But I will put it in the description, and I will say that it is just laughable to believe that the Republicans are even asking this question. Anyway, if you guys actually watch this entire video, please like and subscribe. And I know reaction videos don't do well on my channel. Well, they do and don't. But, well, see you later. Now let's make some whipped cream.